Thank you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful to speak once again on a topic of Estonian Open Air Museum, even though I am working at Estonian Rural Museum Foundation already since 2019. Beautiful, isn't it? You're welcome. I was asked to speak today about the formation of the idea of a Soviet-era apartment building and reasoning behind its necessity. At first glance, it is an intriguing idea that requires readiness in the society. The intrigue as such is primarily in focus. Is it the hated architecture of a Soviet apartment building? In other words, a sudden introduction of such building into the environment of this beautiful museum? Or is it the rich and diverse content of this building? At the Open Air Museum, a building as an artifact is for the visitors a stronger landmark and tends to dominate. But let us discuss the formation of the entire concept and its objectives. Soviet-era issues are not actually new at the Estonian Open Air Museum. I began working here in 1981, and I still remember the contempt of older colleagues for the possible perspective of presenting the Soviet period. If the history museums of that time had an ideological obligation to treat the creation of glorified communism in a propagandistic manner, then luckily plans to research Soviet countryside remain here only on paper with no actual results. Thereafter, at the beginning of 1990s, was talked about introducing Soviet-era standardized rural detached houses, but only to represent architectural specimens. Our first exhibition of the Soviet period was completed in time for the 1997 conference of the Association of European Open Air Museums in the Baltic States. It was situated in a farmhouse Kutsari and called Life Stopped in March 1949, representing deportation to Siberia by Soviet occupants. The rooms of the farmhouse depicted the interior of the family taken from their home at night. Letters written by deportees in Siberia and a slideshow of abandoned farmsteads reinforced the thematic concept of the threshing floor. This slideshow was the cause of some visitors' complaints. A claim was made to cancel the slideshow on assumption that derelict farms were not caused by deportation. The culprit was said to be Prime Minister Mr. Mart Laar of the re-established Independent Republic of Estonia, who had destroyed agriculture, of course meaning collective farms, after which agricultural workers had moved to cities and abandoned their farms. I did not respond to those visitor complaints. They made me happy instead, proving that the exhibition addressed and influenced people. Visitor experience from this exhibition convinced me that Soviet era should be permanently present at our museum as an era of stories many people engage in. We should not let the nostalgia of pastoral idyll of the 19th at the beginning of the 20th centuries dominate. We should also speak out against Soviet nostalgia. In 2000, I had an opportunity to visit Maihaugen Open Air Museum in Lillehammer, Norway, on the invitation from my colleague, Mr. Olav Uros. I truly envied their exposition of the various 20th century private family residences representing different decades. It was interesting to follow the changes in people's lifestyles. I became convinced that it makes sense to exhibit a 20th century society as a rapidly modernizing society, eliminating regional differences by comprehensive comparison of short periods of time. In this case, architectural history is equally supported by memories with specific narratives, engaging visitors more deeply and personally. However, we are not in Norway. It was clear that we would not achieve our goal of exhibiting modernity with single buildings built over a long construction period, considering Estonians' financial possibilities. It was a sad realization in the light that Estonian history museums were already renewing their exposition during new independence, meaning they were putting history back to its feet from the upside-down position and creating a new sign system. I wished to contribute to this, making the world a better place. In addition, being an open-air museum, we could differ from other museums by being more balanced as compared to semiotic symbolism of history museums and their curators focusing on thematic and guided understanding. Painful period cannot be here overplayed without historical everyday life corroborating it. Paradoxes of an era are explained here by educational programs of interpretation of specific events. This way, stereotype opinions are overthrown and adoption choices of ordinary people at that time can be explained with more credibility and with no humiliation. Notion of the victim of painful history is wider than expected, and it should be addressed calmly. By the way, do you remember or know the 5 paradoxes of Soviet time by any chance? There are. No one works, but production increases. Production increases, but shops are empty. Shops are empty, but homes are full. Homes are full, but everyone complains. Everyone complains, but all vote for, not against. These paradoxes exist now in the period settings of the Soviet apartment building at the Estonian Open Air Museum and should be known today because these represent attitude system of the whole society of that time. The responsibility of the museum is to interpret this for the visitors, focusing purposefully on nostalgia that affects considerable audiences at present, especially in relation to their memories of their happy childhood. The next step in the development of the idea came from a conference speech of a Norwegian architect, Lars Røde. He presented the project of an urban apartment building to be erected at Norsk Folkemuseum in Oslo. What a splendid idea, but not applicable at our rural architecture museum, which excludes urban buildings. Out of professional envy, the idea still settled in my mind. Yeah, apartment building had also been built in our countryside. We could collect recent decades of our history and their challenges in there. The ugliness and architectural worthlessness of the building did not discourage me. On the contrary, we could show how these ugly buildings were introduced to intentionally destruct traditional farm system and demagogically eliminate differences between rural and urban way of life in the Soviet Union. By the way, another idiotic recommendation of Soviet authorities was to move dispersed farmhouses together to create ideal Russian Main Street villages. I was convinced that we cannot discard one part of our history. courage to represent painful objects and topics that the Open Air Museum shows healing of the society. And it is just this apartment building that helps in our museum to efficiently interpret challenging topics. I cannot recall any opposition when I shared my idea of an apartment building with my colleagues. The idea might have seemed crazy enough so that no one took it maybe seriously. I was aware that it could be quite impossibly technically, as some Soviet-time stone buildings could well consist of bricks and mortar with high concentration of sand, because most of the cement was stolen during construction. Was it even possible to relocate such buildings? And in 2005, we began preparing a new detailed layout design for our museum so that new and existing exposition buildings would correspond to new laws. We decided to designate a plot for Soviet house. The term Soviet house did not raise any questions with several committees I had to get approval of our design from. In fact, it was more successful than the idea of a marina in the museum that was not approved. During summer 2007, I began interviewing visitors to get public opinion about construction of a Soviet house. The results were not positive. They said, a house like this should not be valued in the national environment of our museum. It would be a sacrilege. Secondly, the museum was expected to act only as an institution saving heritage, but nobody in Estonia has ever thought about the need to save the Soviet apartment buildings of the village. Therefore, it was asked, if there are hundreds of heritage barn dwellings abandoned in the countryside, why doesn't the museum save them? My answer to this was and is that these should be salvaged on location, and a designated program for maintaining and researching rural architecture was launched here in 2006 to support this approach. It is my opinion that the Open Air Museum cannot focus on beautiful only and become a national fetish. Historical buildings are here today because of their substantive meanings in the cultural memory. Our society needs this apartment house to speak out about all our history in the second half of the 20th century. In the context of visitor research, I sometimes think about currently hugely popular service design methodology, where the main criteria for preparing an exhibition are interests and needs of target groups. If we had adhered to this, the Soviet house would never have arrived at the museum. Quite a few interviewed visitors said that if this house was here, they would not come to the museum any longer. Today, this exposition is hugely popular. So I hereby claim that despite prejudiced target groups, we have the responsibility to sustain versatile collective memory in our cultural space. Success and influence of a museum business relies foremost on educational representation of professional, outstanding and trustworthy content. By the way, we had introduced Soviet era to this museum even before the Soviet apartment building by Open Seto Farm already in 2015. Construction and contents of one half of the house date from 1961 as opposed to the traditional interior of a heritage Seto farmhouse in the other half. This is a fascinating development narrative of a house and family in a specific cultural environment. The same methodology, also a less personalized version of it, had been used in our museum already in 1984 by Open Kolga Farm from Hiiumaa. The Soviet apartment building seemed more achievable in 2016-17 when we hoped to receive construction funding from Enterprise Estonia agency for a family tourism project Imperial Legacy in an Estonian village. This project was supposed to create a spatial historical timeline from Tsarist Russia to present-day Republic of Estonia, and the apartment building was meant to be one of the stops out of 7. In the extensive process of project preparation, we already agreed on apartment buildings themes during our team meetings. We began looking for specific stories. We planned to use the basement for a summarizing exhibition and hands-on activities already then. A through gem was the story of an inhabitant of this house in the 1960s, when a sizable apartment of a young professional was soon turned into a Soviet-style shared apartment. In the 1970s flat, we inhabited a happy family with children. What I had in mind in connection with this was also the dread of young female university graduates who could be sent to mandatory positions in the unknown countryside that could result either in happy family life or, as presented in the 1990s apartment, now in alcoholism. Tell you the truth, I was not ready to represent the topic of alcoholism in the house. It was one of the worst officially tolerated Soviet plagues. My images of the 90s were even worse in this context than those depicted in the exposition today. I was apprehensive of painful and too strong visitor reaction to this. My respect goes to colleagues who have now presented this problem very well and on multiple levels. Of course, it is necessary as it enables the narrative of some adverse circumstances of big dreams during major changes in society. Yes, we cannot just ignore them either. The last apartment with modern Eurofinish was meant to interpret the rite of passage in the new era, but also an argument against senseless demolishing of all ugly Soviet buildings today. Unfortunately, our versatile and copious development project, including the apartment building, fell victim to service design approach. Project assessors claimed that it included elements which expelled museum visits by economically valuable Russian tourists. Our hope for funding was crushed. In the meanwhile, we had time to visit Aarhus Open Air Museum, Denmark, where Director Professor Thomas Blokram's team had erected urban residential buildings with interesting thematic apartments. It was so inspiring, and technical transfer methodology teachings by Aarhus colleagues were so exciting that we could not abandon the idea of our own apartment building any longer. We had also been able to save required funds for construction. Thus, this multi-layered, trustful building, essential and influential in context for present-day society, just had to arrive. The next, most complicated stage, the execution stage, took place already without me. I wish to express my gratitude and congratulate colleagues of Estonian Open Air Museum for this excellent exposition. I strongly believe that it can efficiently address any recently revived past nostalgia in society with its calm candor. This building gives multiple interpretation options and is extremely suggestive for senses. It states with clarity, it is our history, but we do not want this era back. On its 65th anniversary, I wish Estonian Open Air Museum continuing creative insight. I'm happy to have gained considerable amount of knowledge and experience while working here as a head in 1992-2018. Your work has contributed to my being decorated with the Order of the White Star by President of Estonia this year. I'm incredibly grateful. I also highly value the inspiring influence of colleagues from the Association of European Open Air Museum. I had a privilege to have the best mentors, friends, and colleagues who taught me to see what makes a museum special and influential in the society. I'm glad if the dream of an outstanding, honest, and brave museum persists here today. Best of luck to you.
Thank you very much, Merike. It was very nice to have this story some way completed. How long actually this process was?
Too long.
To take this everything happen. So I really hope that those who haven't been there yet into apartment house will have the chance to look into the today's afternoon or tomorrow. So it was really, I haven't even thought that this process was so long as you started already, that you get inspired in 2000. So, but maybe there are some questions. I was really actually surprised when you were talking about this making surveys among visitors 2006, that they were so skeptical about that, because actually generally in the society at that time this Soviet nostalgia was considered quite positively, or there was many events taking already place, kind of nostalgic parties and so on. So that was more connected with the position of Open Air Museum as such. That
it's an ugly house, and Estonian Open Air Museum is a beautiful national museum, and this is a sacrilege. And 2007, somebody said that it was after the Alyosha was our
after the Bronze Night
yes,
riots.
That it is the same if this monument will be taken to the museum.
Ah, okay. That would be also interesting solution. Okay. Yeah.
So, do you think that it was hard for visitors to accept that there's going to be Soviet building from kolkhoz? Because ethnographic museums tend to be kind of romanticizing. It's very aesthetically pleasing and lovely when you go and look to your nation's roots, or you know how the farmers lived, or what was the connection between a human being and the nature, and you know the soil. So, what was the main reason they hated that idea?
I explained that an open air museum is, one thing is a house, and another thing is, if I explained that there is a very important content, then yeah, no, maybe, but the house in this very nice museum with barn dwellings and also it is not good. And yeah. So two things in Open Air Museum. What do you can explain, and how is the tradition? If you tell here only about the buildings, now Open Air Museum was erected from architects 57, because it wasn't possible to create the National Museum to tell something very national. and so it was only the buildings. In my young time, I was looking the exposition house only what is typical, what is, and the content there was something what we learn in school, but nowadays is more personalized.
Yeah. It maybe has to do also with that back then in 2006-2007 there wasn't so much exhibitions about Soviet everyday life in the museum and at the permanent exhibitions also here, so that National Museums just started to make exhibitions about Soviet
but
period.
one thing is exhibition, another thing is interior. And if you go to the apartment house, it's a nice, oh, it's my bed, and so it's nostalgia. And so you can, these words you can, now if we have the wall, you can use only if you think about all words, and you have to have programs or something to explain. Yes, we have had all at home. The life was good. We didn't think every day how we will be independent tomorrow. But and you have to say it to the. What is the difference between the life then, if we had something, we didn't know that we can live better, we have now been abroad.
Perhaps the attitude of people started to change when they were involved. When they were involved in collecting the stories for the house, as well as collecting items to furnish these flats. But I think that the main fear of people was that this house from the Soviet period would be very political, you know. It's connected to the political history. But it's the result that has come out. It's a house about our daily life, very simple stories. And I think that is important, that they come here to the museum and that everyone can make some connections in these flats, and that's what works in this house.
Yeah, and we didn't have the signs of communist signs in our interior. Maybe one only was a calendar, which was one for all people. But we had, it was an ordinary life, and we had to be there.
Thank you. I think we can continue the discussions afterwards. Thank you, Merike, once more.